Big Podcast.
Any room you walk into, two things are happening. One, you're getting a feel for the room, the people who are in the room. Do you belong or do you not belong? And the people already there, they're doing the same thing to you. How do you know if you belong or if you don't belong? And how do they know, the people already there, if you belong or don't belong? I'm going to talk more about that on this episode because doing that is how you grow a big podcast. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. My name is David Hooper. The website, bigpodcast.com. I've got a weekly newsletter. It goes out every Friday morning, New York City time. You can find it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is what I'm covering in this issue, number 206. Insider language equals big podcast. How to build an audience from scratch. The problem with podcasting conferences. And there are a lot of them. We're going to talk about three. Could a drug prevent hearing loss from loud noise and aging? When I say loud noise, that's you listening through headphones. Hearing loss is something we're all up against. I know you can edit via text now, but not the same. Going to dive deeper into that. What I've learned from $3,394,480 in digital course sales. This applies to your podcast. Jargon in podcasting. Also some classified ads, things that will help you to build a bigger podcast, have a podcast people care about, have content that people want to spread, and have something that makes you money, the things that this podcast is about. This episode of Build a Big Podcast brought to you by Riverside.fm. Studio quality recordings anywhere. Had a session this week that I was engineering. Riverside.fm, that was the chosen recording platform. Let me tell you one of the things that I like about it. There's a producer mode, and this is fantastic. When you're interviewing somebody as a host, it's you and it is that person, your guest. But sometimes there are company people. Sometimes there's an engineer. That's me. Sometimes there's another engineer on the other side of the connection. So you've got all these people, a host and a guest, and those people, not the host and the guest, are staring at the guest. The host, they're staring at the host as well, but the host has been through it a lot. The host knows what he or she is getting into. The guest, maybe not. And the guest is already nervous. The guest might have red light syndrome. The guest might have a fear of being exposed. So you're not getting that intimacy that you want and the intimacy that it takes to have a great podcast interview. Not when everybody's staring at you. But thanks to Riverside's producer mode, you can cut some of those cameras off. You can actually connect with people one-on-one, even if other people are there. I want you to try this for free. Go to riverside.fm, check it out. They're going to give you a couple of hours. You do an interview, maybe two interviews. Put together the show, see how all these tools work for you. You get full access to it. It's riverside.fm. Go there right now and get your free account. If you want to stick around, I've got a discount code for you. It's going to get you 15% off. And that discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. That's riverside.fm. Go there now and get your free account. Use the discount code if you want to stick around to get 15% off. The discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. Let's go. I'm going to go through these things that I mentioned one by one, all of them about podcasting, growing your podcast, making a better podcast, making a podcast that people care about. Because of that, it gets a little bit tricky. Sometimes it's not very clear when I've ended one thing and moved on to another. I'm like a DJ mixing tape, baby. Because of that, you're going to hear this. That's how you know I'm moving on, and that's how you know. If you want more information and you want more links, go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Ready? Here we go. Insider language equals big podcast. If there is a secret to having an engaged audience, people who really care about your podcast, people that will miss you if you stop making your podcast, it's being an insider and letting people know, yes, I'm an insider. You're not a nameless, faceless host. You're somebody who gets these people. That's why they care. That's why they listen. That is why they share your podcast with other people who are just like them, also insiders, because we hang out with people that are just like us. Think about your friends. Go through your phone. Do it. Pick it up. Look through your contact list. How many people are going to church with you? How many people are in your neighborhood? How many people are working with you? Insiders, man. You may be in a few different groups, but each of those groups, there are people that are like you in a certain way. That's how podcast listeners are. And if you really want to connect with podcast listeners, you've got to let them know that you are one of them. Think about listening to a podcast on podcasting. You're doing it right now. You don't just listen to me. And if you are listening to me, you're either new, this is the first podcast on podcasting you've ever heard, or you've listened to other podcasts on podcasting and you came back to me. Why? It's because I'm in the game, man. I was just telling this story about engineering something this week. I'm with you, man. We're doing the same kind of work. I'm not just a nameless, faceless guy who's talking about podcasting. I'm actually doing it. Let me tell you a story of a Canadian musician. He was doing this. Tom Cochrane is his name. You probably heard a song he did called Life is a Highway. I'm not talking about that. We're all sick of that song. Before going solo, he was in a band called Red Rider, and they had a hit. It wasn't just Red Rider. It was Tom Cochrane and Red Rider. That's how it's billed if you want to look this up. It's called Big League. When somebody says Big League in the United States, baseball, that is usually what that means. But Canada, they got baseball. Big League there, hockey. Tom Cochrane, he's a Canadian musician. He says, my boy wants to play in the big league. They get it. It's like, wink, wink. I'm a Canadian too. That's one of the reasons he's a legendary Canadian musician. Now here, that was a radio hit, the United States, we all think it's about baseball. And the story would have worked just as well had it been about baseball. But it wasn't. It's a Canadian musician giving a wink and a nod to other Canadians saying, hey, this is for you. You've got all these American bands coming up to Canada, more or less taking over our scene. I mean, Canada's got its own rock scene, but not like the United States. This is the big leagues, if you want to use that word. Rock and roll, the culture, the music, that is one of our biggest exports. You could argue that we invented rock and roll. So this guy, he wants to play in the U.S. market, but he's also saying to the Canadians, hey, I'm one of you. Support me. Local boy done good. That's what we're all trying to do in our podcast. Support me. You can go to those big guys, commercial radio, television, film, music, whatever. There are a lot of options. But if you want to support somebody who's just for you, who gets you, who's in the trenches with you, that's this podcast. How do you do it? Insider language. Things that your listeners get that maybe work for other people. If you're lucky, you've got both of those things. But your insiders, the guys that are true fans of your podcast, get them in a different way. Speaking of rock and roll, 50s music is notorious for this. Certain songs meant something to listeners. There was an inside joke, but they were able to get through censors. My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry. Is it a bell hanging on a string? That's what the lyrics say. You be the judge. Willie and the Hand Jive. Similar. You want to see that video? I've got it linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Focus on your insiders. That's the big lesson here. Let others come along when they can. I'm curious for you. Insider language, are you using it? What are you focusing on? Reach out to me, Blue Sky, Mastodon, or Threads. Again, all the links, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Let's talk about Big Podcast Amp. Audio monetization program. If you want help getting to the insiders, connecting with them in a real and authentic way, a way that they care when you show up. They care if you don't show up. They want to be part of what you're doing. You're going to like Big Podcast Amp, the audio monetization program. It's a personal coaching program. You're going to be working with me personally, and I'm going to help you do three things. One, grow your podcast audience. Two, get people talking about your podcast. And three, make more money with your podcast and your podcasting skills. I've mentioned it a couple times on this episode already, engineering somebody else's show. I'll do it for you. Yeah, that's podcasting skills. You need what I've got? We can talk about that. And the same thing is true for you. Just because you have your own podcast does not mean that that is the only way that you can make money in podcasting. There are a ton of options. There's a lot of content being generated. Can somebody use your hosting? Can somebody use your engineering, your editing? I can show you how to build a business around it. And I can show you how to build a business around your podcast, your message, the insiders that you have put together that are listening to your podcast. You want more details? This is how to get them. Bigpodcast.com/amp, bigpodcast.com/AMP. How to build an audience from scratch. I've got an article that's linked at, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 206. I think you're going to find it helpful for growing your podcast. I want to talk about some of the highlights, 3 things that this guy's talking about. Number 1, and this is very important for your mental health, forget the numbers. Focus on who follows you, not how many people follow you. I've been talking about insiders this episode. You want the insiders. You don't want random, nameless, faceless people. You don't want bots. This isn't a numbers game. This is a quality game, not quantity, quality. Not all followers and listeners are equal. How unequal are they? It is almost better to have 100 solid followers who are really into what you are doing than 10,000 people who press the follow button or the subscribe button and never interact with you. There was a time when people, sponsors, they didn't really understand how this worked. And they were basing your credibility and your authority and your influence on the number of followers you had on social media, your reach or your supposed reach. That is not true anymore. What people are looking for is interaction. Interaction is far more important. And you can have a lot of interaction with just 100 people. I'm not saying to stop at 100 people, but I'm saying to focus on who follows you, not the number of people that are following you. That's lesson number one. Forget the numbers. Focus on who follows you, not how many people are following you. By the way, even real people aren't engaging like they were. I've got an example. It's on my LinkedIn page. It's linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. If you want to go there, check out what I post and then check out some of the responses. These AI comment tools. Nobody's really talking. We're hitting a response button. Should we be appreciative, thankful, contrary, excited? It gives you the options. One button is all it takes. Pops out a reply via AI. And you can tell. If you want to see some of those responses and know what not to do, check out my LinkedIn page. I've got it linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Let's get to lesson number 2. What should you talk about? You really want to grow an audience? You've got to know what to talk about. You do know what to talk about, right? I call it flying your flag. You know what to talk about. Now, maybe you're scared to talk about it. You get that inkling, that feeling. I should really talk about this. This is what people are asking about. This is what people are talking about in private, maybe not in public. You know, those real conversations that you have. How great is that? When you meet somebody, maybe it's a friend, maybe you go on a date, and you can just be real with somebody. Cut through all the BS, the facade, and just get real. That's why people like podcasts. You're not going to hear that on broadcast radio. Nothing against broadcast radio. Look, I do broadcast radio. But that's for the masses. 62 degrees here in the Music City. We're getting some great weather. Stars out. Here's Sailing by Christopher Cross. That's not deep. It's nice. But when you want real conversations, people are going to podcast. And what should you talk about? You know what to talk about. Something that's real. If you haven't seen my essay about flying your flag, I have it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Lesson number 3, build a magnet, not an audience. There is a saying, money is attracted, not pursued. The same is true for an audience. If you build a great podcast and let people come to you, you will get that audience. And I'm not saying field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Kind of. You can't just plop a podcast down in the middle of nowhere, though, and expect people to find you. You've got to let people know about it, at least that initial group of people, and have something so good that they're going to go to their friends. Again, people hang out with people that are just like them, other insiders, and they will do the work for you as far as marketing and telling people about your stuff. But it still helps if you can talk about your podcast a lot. Don't assume people know what a podcast is, how to get to your podcast. Keep talking about your podcast. Obviously, be skillful. Your wife, your husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, kids, mother-in-law. How many times can you tell them about it? If they're not going to listen, they're not going to listen. But they don't need to listen. We're not talking about full-on numbers here, but they don't need to listen. We're not talking about big numbers. We're talking about insiders. If your mother-in-law, your husband, your boyfriend, your wife's boyfriend, if they were insiders, they would already be into this. If they were insiders, you wouldn't have to convince them. We are not in the convincing business. We're in the offering business. We show up. We plant our flag. It's high in the sky. People can see it, and they can salute, tune in, find us, follow us, engage with us, or not. We are not in the business of trying to convince them to listen if they're not interested. We don't want them if they're not interested. We want the insiders. Build a magnet, not an audience. Here's some other highlights for you. There's no such thing as too long, only too boring. I learned this from a guy I knew named Gary Halbert. You might hear him mentioned online. He was a famous copywriter, a very interesting character. Not too long, only too boring. I don't think that he came up with that phrase. When I hear it mentioned today, people don't even mention Gary. He's the first guy that told me about it, but I think it was people well before him. Marketing guys, sales guys, copywriters, songwriters. Never too long, only too boring. It's something we've known for a long, long time, and it definitely applies to your podcast. A+ content with C- delivery is a great starting point. Don't get caught up in having the perfect de-esser or EQ or microphone. Focus on the content. What happens if you don't focus on the content, thinking that, I just need a great mic? Well, C- content with A+ delivery, the opposite of that, that's a death trap. In the end, content matters. Content is king. Do you need to record yourself well? Yes, people are judging you by the quality of your voice. They need to be able to listen to you. I heard a podcast the other day. Great content, man. But there was so much reverb in the room. Somebody had a condenser mic probably in the back of the room. It's a guy talking from a live seminar. I said, man, this is really great stuff, but I couldn't hear it because of the situation that I was in. We talk about disabilities. People think of it as a permanent disability, like they can't hear, can't see, not able to access your content like they might want. And they need a transcript for that, or they need something to enable them to access the content. Well, good quality audio is part of that because of situational disabilities. If I'm in a situation where there's a loud environment, there's a car, and there's road noise, if I've got somebody speaking into a condenser mic and there's all sorts of reverb, that voice isn't cutting through like my voice is right now because I've done all this stuff. Your message gets lost. It doesn't matter how good your content is. So you've got to think about both. But the starting point, A+ content, C- delivery, if that's where you are, don't let that keep you from recording your stuff, getting better at that content, and attracting the people that you can. Ideally, though, get your equipment in order. If you don't know how to do that, reach out to me. There are several low-cost options that can make you sound fantastic. People don't want information, they want a feeling. People want hope. People want to know that things are going to be okay. We are in a society where we don't get to feel, or if we feel, maybe it's anger. But we're blocking that out because that's not socially acceptable. I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh on occasion. I don't agree with him politically at all. One of the reasons I listened to him because he was a great host. The dude could get behind a mic, turn it on, go and go and go and go. Rarely ever guests. Sometimes he had callers. A lot of commercials. So it wasn't quite a 3 or 4 hour show as far as the time that he was speaking, but he was speaking quite a bit. And then I realized I was getting a secondary payoff, is that he was making me feel something. Anger. I would get pissed. 10 minutes in, I'd be pissed. A great host makes you feel something. I was interviewing a music producer yesterday for my broadcast show, Music Business Radio. I asked her what made a great song. She said, a great song does one of two things. One, it makes you say, hell yeah. Wave your hands in the air, stand up, shout, get excited. Or the other thing, which could be the opposite of that, it makes you think, this is me. This is my story. Same thing for your podcast. People don't want information. They want a feeling. Final highlight, the guy who said this first was a musician, Steve Martin. You know he's a musician? Yeah, banjo. But also a stand-up comic, writer, actor. People know him for those things. Be so good they can't ignore you. That's his quote. It's in a book called Born Standing Up. And he's right. Be so good they can't ignore you. What does that look like to you? I want to know. Reach out to me. Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads. I've got more thoughts at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Also, the full article with even more lessons. Let's review those. 1, forget the numbers. Focus on who follows you, not how many people follow you. 2, what should you talk about? And the answer, you know, fly your flag, man. Do it. And 3, build a magnet, not an audience. People are attracted, not pursued. You're not desperate. You're not in the convincing business. Build something that attracts them. Like attracts like, and people attract people. It builds upon itself. You want all these? You want more thoughts? You want to reach out to me? Newsletter.bigpodcast. You want to reach out to me to talk more? Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. The problem with podcasting conferences. Some interesting thoughts on podcasting conferences from Bandrew Scott. He's got a video. He wrote an article about it. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. He's got 3 points that he makes about problems that we're seeing with podcasting conferences. 1, the schedule. His thought was that a lot of these conferences that we see for podcasting are in the middle of the week. Yet so many podcasters, they've got day jobs. Even if they're full-time podcasters, they're in radio, they've got production schedules. He's saying, why not do some of this on the weekend? Let's get some of the hobbyists in, get some of the creators, get people who are interested in podcasting, but maybe not that interested to take off work. We could expand our audience, have a bigger, more intensive, more helpful discussion around podcasting if more of these events were held on the weekend. He talks about the podcast economy. And I agree with this, that a lot of the podcasting conferences seem to be catering to ad tech, to people with podcasting services, hosting, equipment, to big networks, the guys that are more or less broadcast radio, but they distribute their content via podcast, not via a tower. So that's different. Again, something that neglects the independent creators, the producers, the engineers, the hosts. He talks about the cost. Also tough if you're independent. It is very easy to spend other people's money. You got a $400 a night hotel room, a ticket that's $500, a flight that's maybe, $500, $600, maybe $1,000, depending on where you're coming from. It is very easy to spend $2,000, $3,000 to go to a podcasting event. Is the return there? I don't know. Sometimes I love going to these podcast events because I can see people face to face, nose to nose, toes to toes. Hang out with them. Sometimes hanging out with them in different situations. Not in the podcasting space, but maybe just going out to eat. That's great. But for that, I might as well unconference. You know about unconferencing? Show up in the city. Don't go on the trade show floor. Don't go to any of the events because I don't do that anyway. I usually just talk to people. I know you're thinking like, man, that's low down. Unconferencing. I'm not endorsing it. I owned at one time the second largest music business conference. I know all about unconferencing, put it on your own events that compete with the big event that you're doing. I get that people might be frustrated by that. But my point is, if you're not catering to somebody in a way where they're going to pay for your event and they don't find paying for your event worth it, they're going to do their own thing. When you're catering to the big companies and they don't care about the budget because the money isn't theirs, that is a totally different thing than going to an independent and saying, hey, give me $1,000, give me $400 for a night at the hotel plus resort fees plus taxes. And we're talking a lot of money for some of these independents. And those are the problems that Andrew Scott is talking about. It's a short video. It's worth watching. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 206. What would you like to see in a podcasting conference? I'm not sure that I'm ready to jump back into the conference business, but I've been thinking about it. The last 3 years, there was an event at a podcasting conference that agitated a lot of independent creators. They felt like they were neglected by this podcasting conference. This conference sided with a bigger company. The independents felt like they were not looked at. And ever since then, people have been coming to me, hey, man, how about these independent conferences? Because I've done a couple of them. I've had a couple of one of them was a multi-day event for podcasters. And they went well, smaller, more regional, more focused. Are you going to bring those back? Maybe. I mean, with the quarantine and everything, that kind of derailed my plans for doing more of that. But now that everything seems to be clearing up, moving forward, maybe something to revisit again. If you're interested, reach out, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That's where you can find the video, and that's how you can find more information on how to reach out to me. That's newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Could a drug prevent hearing loss from loud noise and aging? I mentioned earlier that I do a radio show that focuses on the music industry. And I interview people that are musicians. I interview people that are engineers, live sound guys, all of them working around music, some of the music being quite loud. And hearing loss is a real thing. Everybody in the studio wears headphones. Each has an individual volume knob. And you will notice the old radio guys, the old sound guys, the musicians, they are blasting the volume. A lot of guys that I know wear hearing aids. That is due mostly to loud music. They're pretty young, man, in their 50s and 60s. If you're not aware of this, I explain how your ear works in the newsletter, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 206. More or less, there are these tiny hairs in your ear. Loud music is going to damage those hairs. They get smashed down, not as sensitive. When that happens, they don't pop back like they should. And you lose certain frequencies, usually the high frequencies. Strangely enough, The last sound that people can hear, and this is maybe proof of a higher power, a crying baby, that frequency. But everything around there, not so much. Rush Limbaugh, I mentioned him earlier. Now, he lost his hearing because he had an opioid addiction. And that's another issue that we see in the music industry too. If you are abusing pills, yep, that's going to affect your hearing. Rush Limbaugh certainly had that. He got to the point where he couldn't even hear a phone ring. Now, he had a cochlear implant eventually. But there was a time when they didn't have that technology, or he didn't know what was going on, and they were trying to figure out how to solve the problem for him. He was reading transcripts and responding to transcripts. He couldn't even hear callers. My point being, this is a very real issue. There are a lot of ways for you to lose your hearing. And there's research being done for, I guess we'll call it a cure, a fix for losing hearing from loud noise and also aging. Brian Johnson was in Nashville, where I am, working with Vanderbilt University. They've got like a fake eardrum that he's able to slip inside his ear. He's described it as a little balloon, and it acts like an eardrum. He's able to hear again, able to tour, able to listen to music again. I bring this up to say, one, protect your hearing. The best way that you can protect against hearing loss, don't get hearing loss. Watch the volume when you mix. Watch the volume when you're out and about. Watch the volume when you're listening. Second best, be aware of this. It is coming. It will happen in our lives. If you want more information about it, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Where I learned from $3,394,480 in digital course sales. This is an article not about podcasting, but about digital courses. What are podcasts? Digital files, same thing. And he's got a few parallels that I want to talk about, since selling your podcast, and I'll put that in quotes, selling, it's not much different than selling a digital course. One, create a listener journey for your podcast. For example, let people know where to start, let people know how to subscribe. Hey, if you're brand new to the podcast, I want you to go to bigpodcast.com/start. Don't go there. That's not a real URL, but that's an example. Listen to episode 1. That's going to tell you more about what I'm about, how to get the most out of this podcast. That's an example. And certainly how to subscribe, having your own dedicated subscription page. Don't tell people, get your podcast wherever you get great podcasts. No, they don't know how to get podcasts. They just happened upon you, some of them. Go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Now, that is a real URL. Go there. I got 3 buttons for you, one for Android, one for iPhone, one with an RSS feed. You heard me say that. 1 click is all it takes. Instantly subscribe and never miss an episode. Have a subscribe page. You want to steal mine? Do it. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. And when I say steal it, I mean take the copy. Obviously, you're going to want to change the links. Second thing, focus on the problem and deliver a solution. What have I done this entire podcast? I open it up. Hey, if you want to grow your podcast, have a podcast that people care about, have a podcast that makes your mother proud, that makes you money, this is the podcast for you. Because people don't have that. Maybe people don't care about your podcast. Some people have nobody that cares about their podcast. That doesn't mean it's a bad podcast. It just means some things need to be changed. Those are the things that I focus on here. Number 3, decide a method of distribution and promote that outlet. Apple for iPhone, Spotify for Android. What did I do with my subscription page? 1 for iPhone, 1 for Android. I don't say, well, go to Apple, go to Radio Public. I'm on the iHeart app. I'm on Spotify. Yeah, you're on Spotify? I'm on Spotify. No. I'm doing it based on how you listen to podcasts. And how you listen to podcasts is not the software. That doesn't matter. It's the hardware you listen on. iPhone or Android. That's 90% of podcast listeners. Can you listen via the web? Yeah, bigpodcast.com. I gave you that URL. Find one outlet or one piece of hardware, Apple or Android. We've got 2. Pick one. And people do pick one, and they never switch. Android people, I need to be able to customize it. I need to have 8,000 billion gigabytes of RAM. I don't want to use a closed system like that. Well, yeah, we know. Android people are crazy. iPhone people are crazy. I'm not going to get in the middle of that. I got something for each of you. Make your podcast easily accessible. Well, that's the web player, bigpodcast.com. Make it as easy to listen to as possible. Let me give you another audio example. People with audiobooks. Well, you got to use the audiobooks.com app, or you've got to use the WixiWoo app, or you've got to, I don't even know what these apps are. Everybody's on Amazon, everybody's on Audible. Or most people. Obviously, not everybody. But you're going to get 90% if you say Amazon, Audible, and for podcast, Apple Podcast or Spotify. Don't worry about everything. Make it easy to access. Some people say, I hate Spotify. I'm not going on Spotify. Okay. Don't listen to it. But you got listeners there. You're going to make things harder on them because they're not going to do harder. They're just going to listen to somebody else. Make things easy on people. Make your podcast easily accessible. Number 5, keep episodes brief but packed with value. Less is more. Don't go 4 hours. Don't go 2 hours or even 1 hour if you don't need to. I'm right now at 45 minutes, 31 seconds. Look at your timer. Big Podcast Supercomputer, give it to me.
This is the Big Podcast Supercomputer with a courtesy time check. You are now 30 minutes and 58 seconds into this episode. Approximately 15 minutes of tape, roughly 1/3 of what was recorded, has been removed.
That's how much I've cut from this episode. You should be doing the same thing. Brief, but packed with value. If you say something that's not valuable, cut it. I've got more thoughts at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Jargon in podcast. In podcasting, it's very common to encounter specific terms and phrases that can easily slip into conversation without a second thought. Jargon could be industry standards, it could be niche topics, specialized knowledge. And if you don't know what somebody's talking about, because maybe you're not an insider, you want to be one, but you're not one yet, you can be like, what? Sounds too complicated. I run into that all the time when I'm talking to musicians, producers, people who've been in the music business. Like I said, that's my broadcast show. I'm talking to insiders, people who've had success. And they'll say something like, man, yeah, me and Billy playing at the Bluebird. And I was like, whoa. Playing at the Bluebird? What? That's how your listener's going to think unless they know what the Bluebird is. So I've got to come in and tell them what the Bluebird is. Yeah, the Bluebird, it's a well-known club in Nashville. It's actually in a strip mall. You might have seen it on the TV show Nashville. A lot of the scenes were done there. Explain what it is that you're talking about. Performance royalties, sync royalties, mechanical royalties. Sometimes they don't even say that. They'll say mechanicals. Regardless, you got to explain it. Mechanicals, what? You mean mechanical royalties, which is the money that you make when a physical record or now a digital download is sold. That's jargon. You probably got some of these in your podcast. SEO, evergreen content, call to action. We certainly have that among podcasters. Things have significance within certain circles, the insiders, but not the outsiders. You want the outsiders to become insiders? You're going to want to watch this. Jargon in podcasts, do be thinking about it, but at the same time, have something for the insiders. The inside jokes, just a little bit. Not something to isolate people, but something like big leagues. It means different to Canadians. Throw in an ice hockey reference if you're in Canada. If you're in the United States, let's talk about baseball. That's the difference. Know your audience, talk to the insiders, but don't isolate the outsiders and make them go away where they're never going to become insiders. We're trying to fly the flag and get people to come to us. Again, we're not pursuing people. We are attracting them. And this is how to do it. I've also got a funny joke about this, by the way. It's visual. You can see it. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 206. Classified ads for you, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, and to make more money with your podcast. Book Like a Boss, automated guest booking for podcasters. Working on a project with another producer this week, doesn't have automated booking. It has taken 5 days to nail down a time. Automated booking like Book Like a Boss, 1 click. That's it. A guest sees your calendar, you're already free. The guest says, am I free? If so, clicks that time, it books it. Everything after that is automated. So if you're tired of missing interviews, going back and forth, interview booking taking way too long, Book Like a Boss. It's a great way to handle all that and all the other details when it comes to guest booking. Automated guest scheduling, automatic reminders, including text messages sent to guests, and it integrates with all email and calendar software. You can find out more information about it and try it for free at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Privacy. It lets you control when, where, and how much you can be charged. Burner credit cards. Also free. You can check it out online at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you want more from me, you want to work together, Big Podcast AMP, I've talked about it. One-on-one coaching available at bigpodcast.com/AMP. If you want the podcast, You want the newsletter. Well, you know what the newsletter is. Don't make me say it. Okay. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. But if you want the podcast, what you're listening to right now, want to make sure that you never miss an episode, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. You will find 3 buttons there, one for iPhone, one for Android, one for an RSS feed. Pick the one that you want. Every single episode that I do, you'll get it for free. I'm here every week, sometimes more than once a week. Every single one of these episodes about growing your podcast, getting more people to your podcast, making money with your podcast, making a podcast that people care about, making a podcast that if you go away, people are going to miss it. Say, what happened to that podcast? They're going to come to you and say, get that podcast back. I miss it. It's a powerful feeling. When you've got that kind of connection with people, you can do powerful work. You can change the world. You can make it a better place. You can have impact. I want to help you do that. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That makes sure you subscribe to the podcast. Go there right now before you forget, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. And I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.